Gwen Stacy's death in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was honestly possibly the saddest scene in the entire franchise. It was acted with such perfection thanks to Andrew Garfield, and it honestly kind of made you forget the rest of the movie was terrible. However, a lot of people were disappointed with the decision to kill her in the first place, as they thought she had more to offer the series. I myself believe that she should have stuck around at least a movie longer, so what if Gwen Stacy didn't die in The Amazing Spider-Man 2? So in this timeline, Peter manages to successfully rescue Gwen Stacy. Instead of being hesitant with telling Gwen to run, he instead attacks Harry before he even has a chance to attack Gwen. So Gwen manages to escape from the power grid unharmed, and Peter apprehends Harry and sends him to Ravencroft, no harm done. So now Peter is more than ready to go off to England with her, since he knows that Harry is likely to get out of prison one day with the kind of money he has at his disposal, and he wants Gwen to be out of the line of fire for understandable reasons. So we end The Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Peter and Gwen flying off to England together. They move into their shared apartment, and Peter makes a quick phone call to Aunt May, who gives Peter her full support in his decision. And we see her looking in his garbage can at all the stuff that Peter ripped off his walls involving his parents, and we can see a look of relief because she was hoping Peter would leave the mystery of his parents behind. And now he has. Now he's looking towards the future. So now the final shot of the movie is a callback to Spider-Man 2, where Peter hears trouble on the streets of Oxford City, and he prepares to go off swinging. Gwen gives him one final supportive kiss and tells him not to be too late. So now we're on to The Amazing Spider-Man 3, and things with Peter and Gwen have been going really well. They've been living in Oxford together for a few months now, and they even have some cute Christmas photos up on their fridge. Now, Oxford is actually a fairly crime-free city, so Peter actually doesn't have to worry about being Spider-Man as much. He has plenty of time to spend with Gwen, and he even works a small part-time job as a photographer with a comedic type of editor-in-chief as his boss. I'm picturing someone like Ricky Gervais, Martin Freeman, or Simon Pegg. You know, somebody that's British but has really good comedic timing, just to make up for the lack of J. Jonah Jameson. Also, maybe Jessica Drew could have a cameo here. Maybe. So now, things are looking pretty good for Peter, but we see that despite him being happy, he misses New York. He finds himself regularly reading articles online about how the crime rate in New York has been going up without him, and we can tell he feels a little bit guilty about it, but he's trying to put it to the back of his mind for the sake of his relationship. So now later on, we see the gentleman visiting Harry Osborn in prison, and they talk about assembling their own team, with the Rhino being their first member. However, they know that Spider-Man isn't in New York, because it's kind of hard to keep that a secret, I imagine, so Rhino is instead deployed in Oxford, and we get our first real action scene of the movie. Now, this is an epic fight that levels whole buildings, though Spider-Man is able to rescue people along the way, don't worry, and we soon learn actually that Gwen is now hooked up to an earpiece that he wears underneath his mask. However, when this fight's going on, Gwen's voice starts to turn staticky, and Peter grows really concerned about this. He starts to lose focus on the fight. He's not really paying that much attention to the Rhino anymore, and he starts getting his ass kicked. Then he hears a creepy cackling sound followed by a scream on his earpiece, and Peter starts to get really freaked out. So he makes the decision to abandon the Rhino and return to his apartment just to see what the hell is going on. And we soon discover that the whole fight with the Rhino was just a distraction for Harry to break into the apartment and kidnap Gwen. The only thing that Peter's able to find in his apartment is a clue that will lead him seemingly to another clue and eventually to Gwen's location. See, I know that sounds similar to the Riddler, but honestly, don't worry, I have an idea here. Basically, Harry Osborn is playing mind games with Peter. Each clue ties into he and Peter's friendship, and each clue kind of tells the chronological story of their old friendship. So now we soon discover that Rhino managed to gut an entire bank of all of its funds while Peter was occupied with Gwen. So now the newspaper Peter works for has actually turned against Spider-Man. They used to love him, but now they, along with the rest of the city, resent him. They view what he did during his fight with Rhino as abandonment. They don't know about Gwen, so as far as they know, Spider-Man gave up the fight and left Rhino to rob them all. So now the movie plays on the idea of whether or not Peter was selfish to put Gwen before the rest of the city. With great power comes great responsibility, after all. But we, the audience, understand at the same time why he did it, since he loves her. Now, the rest of the movie features a much angrier Peter, who's desperate to find the love of his life and get her back. That's what Harry was counting on, though, and that's when they unleashed the Venom symbiote on him. Because, yeah, the symbiote was going to be in the original Amazing Spider-Man 3 anyway, and it would have been inside Oscorp, so it makes sense for them to just plant it on him. This whole thing is seen as kind of a, twisted experiment to see exactly what it'll do. So now an already angry Peter is even worse off because the suit makes him do things he wouldn't normally do. He's violent with criminals. And now the city is truly afraid of him. We see this once peaceful Spider-Man-loving town is now destructive and living in fear of their own hero. Peter doesn't even give any of this much thought because he has Gwen to worry about. Now, the next clue takes him directly into a fight against the Rhino, who Peter just absolutely destroys. He has no time for fun or games. He kicks the Rhino's ass and even breaks his suit. He then beats the man to a pulp and he demands answers. He's just yelling, "Where is she?" And we get a standout moment for Andrew Garfield to be the truly phenomenal actor that he's always been. However, Peter doesn't get his answers because he accidentally beats him to death. Because, well, for one thing, people hated Paul Giamatti as the Rhino, and two, it emphasizes what the symbiote combined with everything Peter's going through can really do to a person. So now Peter is horrified that he killed a man, and we get another incredibly well-acted scene of Peter back in he and Gwen's apartment, just looking at photos of him and Gwen. He then decides it's time to remove the suit. Gwen wouldn't want him to be this way. So now Peter soon discovers that the last clue leads him outside of Oxford, outside of England even. It leads him right back to New York City, in particular Oscorp Tower. So now Peter and Harry finally meet with each other for the first time in this movie, with Gwen tied up in the background. Felicia Hardy walks in during the scene, and she just looks at Harry like, "What are you doing?" But not in an angry way, more like an "I care about you, please don't do this" kind of way. So now we get a final action sequence throughout the entire Oscorp building where Sony can feature plenty of Easter eggs. They'll love that, trust me. So now as the fight goes on, we see Felicia sneaking into Harry's office to rescue Gwen. Peter tells Harry about what he saw on the Roosevelt train, about he couldn't help him even if he wanted to because, well, the spider venom is incompatible with anyone who's not a Parker. And now Harry doesn't believe him at first, so Peter actually shows him the file he found. And Harry finally realizes that there's no hope for himself. He steps off his glider and into Felicia's arms. And then Dane DeHaan gets a scene to really show his acting chops, where he's just sobbing and saying how he just doesn't want to die. And it reminds us that Harry is really, in the end, just a kid who wants to have his life ahead of him. He wants to spend a life with Felicia, and he felt like his best friend betrayed him and deprived him of that. Now, what he did was still wrong, but this makes us feel a little more sorry for him. So now, in the end, Harry does go back to prison, and Gwen prepares to return to England, but not with Peter. You see, he decides not to go with her because, yeah, her father was right. She's almost died several times just because, she was associated with him, and he just can't handle it anymore. He loves her too much to have that constant fear inside of him, that fear of her dying constantly. So Gwen and Peter share a tearful departure, and Gwen returns to England alone. However, she's not dead, and really that's all that matters to Peter right now. Though the door has been left open for Gwen to return in the future if she wants to. So now in the end credits, we see the gentleman talking to an unseen figure in a dark part of Oscorp Tower. The voice says that Harry Osborn was weak, and they should have known he would choke. We then pan around to see it's Norman Osborn, who's secretly still alive as a head in a jar, who says it's time to do what his son couldn't. So yeah, I know, I broke Peter and Gwen up. I know you guys are gonna hate me for it, but hear me out, okay? Like, I just think it makes sense. Like, imagine that the love of your life almost dies several times in a row for 3 movies straight just because of you. Like, I mean, I can't help but feel like most people would want to keep them safe, even if it meant not being together. I just feel like that's the natural response. And Peter tried to do that before, even before, Harry Osborn almost killed her twice. or in the actual timeline he did kill her, but in this one he just almost killed her multiple times. But it's that constant fear of losing the person he loves. I just don't think Peter could handle it. He's lost so many people already. He's lost his parents, he's lost his Uncle Ben, and I just don't think he could take losing Gwen. And he knows he couldn't take losing Gwen. We know that he eventually got over it, but it destroyed him. He was never the same again. You could tell at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 he'd become a shell of his former self. Even when he was Spider-Man, you could tell that he wasn't really feeling it anymore. So he knows that Gwen is really the only thing keeping him going, but he also knows that's a double-edged sword, and he needs to keep her safe. So honestly, I just think it would make sense. Not to mention, I'm sorry, but I just can't imagine Sony wanting to do multiple Spider-Man movies in a row in England. Like, they said they wanted to do at least one movie in a different place, but Spider-Man's always been the most associated with New York, and when they don't do Spider-Man in New York, people tend to kind of, groan about it. Like, a lot of people hated the fact that Spider-Man Far From Home was not in New York City, so, I don't imagine people would like the new location that much. They would want him to eventually go back to New York, I'm sure of it, and, they'd want to see J.K. Simmons back as J. Jonah Jameson. They'd want him to be back in New York. It's both Sony and the fans, I feel. And Gwen, I just don't see going back to New York just for Peter. I think she was dead set on doing her career at Oxford, and there's nothing that was going to stop that. So it makes storyline sense, in my opinion, to send Gwen away from Peter, especially because they wanted to open up the door for Peter to have new love interests like Mary Jane Watson, who would have been played by Shailene Woodley. So I just think that this is a way that works out for everybody. We don't have to kill off Gwen, because they possibly shouldn't have even killed her off, in my opinion, because that's what everybody expects, and it's sad, and it doesn't always need to happen in every version, in my opinion. They didn't kill off Bryce Dallas Howard's Gwen, but then again, that's just because she was in just the one movie, and then they didn't do a Spider-Man 4, but you get what I mean. Like, they don't have to kill Gwen if they don't have to, and, I don't think they had to kill Gwen, honestly, for his story to keep getting, better. I think that it could have, just the threat of death alone could have been enough, in my opinion, for his character arc. So yeah, but at least we get one movie where he's in England, and one movie to really, change people's opinion, I think, on Harry Osborn. Because, yeah, a lot of people really didn't like Dane DeHaan's Harry Osborn. I didn't like him that much. I think he's okay for the most part, but I do think occasionally he can be a bit much. And I think the major thing that people didn't like about his feud with Peter is that it wasn't built up enough. Like, in the Raimi movies, it was built up for 3 movies. Like, they were clearly friends, in high school, but in this one, they hadn't seen each other in years, and it was hard to believe they were ever best friends. But now this could help, having him leave these pictures of, like, their childhood with every clue, eventually building up to where they are now. It kind of, helped to extend, what their friendship means. Each picture, you could show a flashback of that moment in time, and kind of help you give it more of a shit about their friendship, you know what I mean? So that's just what I think would happen. I think if Gwen didn't die, they would do a movie in England. I think Green Goblin would probably be the main antagonist again, just to redeem that, that character. I think they would probably kill the Rhino, just because everybody hated the Rhino. I know he was going to be in the Sinister Six, but he would have been the least popular member anyway. So I just think that, it makes sense to just kill him off. Use that as a story for the symbiote, Peter killing him. Yeah, because the symbiote would have been in it too, as I said. It was going to be in The Amazing Spider-Man 3, so it makes sense. So yeah, that's just what I think would happen if Gwen didn't die in TASM 2. But let me know if you disagree with that in the comments down below. I'm sure there's plenty of people that have their own version, and I would love to hear your version in the comments. Also in the comments, make sure to give me more what-if recommendations. I finally said it right. More what-if recommendations about Spider-Man, the Hulk, any other Marvel hero, or anything that's not Marvel. I will read it and try to do it eventually. We'll see what happens there. Also, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with all of your friends and all your various social media platforms. And speaking of social media, don't forget to follow me on Instagram, Rinzler_Productions, and make sure to ring that notification bell to stay up to date on all of my future uploads. Remember, I upload a new video 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time every single day, so I'll see you all tomorrow in the next video.